I'm not sure if you've heard of Steam Forged Games. At some point recently, they contracted with Free League to make a sort of introductory set of Symbaroum miniatures that pair with a Ruins of Symbaroum encounter. Those miniatures are what we're going to take a look at today, along with a glance at the encounters. This sort of product, which they're calling Epic Encounters, also happened to produce some swag, apparently. Things like an Epic Encounters tote bag, beanie, holographic sticker, and coffee mug with cork bottom, but that's besides the point. Just to be clear, Symbaroum and Ruins of Symbaroum are two different games, and I've reviewed both on this channel in case you want to go deeper. But basically, Symbaroum uses unique rules of its own that aren't even Year Zero engine, which is what Free League normally uses for almost all of its games. And Ruins of Symbaroum uses an adaptation of D&D 5e rules. This adventure here is keyed to Ruins of Symbaroum. The first box is called The Gem in the Barrow, and it's marketed as a battle in a box with 20 miniatures, a battle map, and a booklet that details the encounter. When you pop it open, there's this 1-inch gridded battle map that shows an encampment on one side and a barrow top on the other. I'm going to try and not spoil the actual encounter details, but I will be sort of flipping through the booklet here in a bit. If you don't want to spoil the encounter, just don't pause the video and zoom into the booklet. Anyway, the paper for the map is thick, almost plastic-like in durability, and the print job is nice. The booklet is a 24-page staple-bound job with nice paper. Again, the encounter is called The Gem in the Barrow. In a way, it's kind of overkill for a single encounter in terms of page count, but I think if you bought this box set and committed to painting all of these miniatures and setting everything up, you'd want more details rather than fewer here. They really leaned into the context for this encounter and the framework for it all. Structure-wise, the encounter is pretty flexible. It involves a MacGuffin in the form of a gem and multiple factions that could get a hold of that gem. It's just a single encounter after all, so you're naturally going to have a lot of elbow room to tweak or change things. Finally, we get to the 20 miniatures themselves. There are actually 11 unique sculpts here, with 4 redundant goblins, 4 elves, and 4 barbarians. As sculpts go, these are pretty excellent. I think the value proposition here is you're getting creatures that look exactly like the ones from actual Symbaroum, which has always had a pretty distinct take on some of these fantasy races. Obviously, some of these sculpts are more generic fantasy, and you can use these minis for any fantasy game you want. I noticed also that the thin parts of the minis do have a bit of flex to them. Steamforged Games has produced a lot of board games, so they've long ago figured out the exact right kind of plastic to use for maximum durability. I'd say that a number of these models are relatively simple in design, which is good for an amateur painter like myself. Okay, here's a classic Symbaroum tableau right here. Those horns, that mask, that's just straight out of the mind of artist Martin Grip himself. Actually, it's straight off the cover of the Advanced Player's Guide. Here's a priest. I don't know if you're familiar with the setting of Symbaroum, but that's the sort of crowning achievement of the whole IP, whether you're playing with the original rules or the 5e rules. Magic of any sort is dangerous to use, and often punishing and corrupting. Now, I say that these minis would be perfect for novice painters like myself, but I think an expert painter could have a lot of fun with these details as well. Sometimes I feel like an overly detailed mini kind of bosses you around by telling you where to put a different color, but with relatively simpler sculpts like these, you can choose your own gradients and have more room for shading. Also, these are 28mm scale, and you don't want sculpt details to be too busy. This guy has a full pig's head as a belt buckle. That's something you'll only see on a miniature. It would just lead to a lot of logistical issues in real life, or really even in a drawn illustration. Here's one of 4 identical goblins. I guess that's just an unavoidable spoiler. You fight goblins in this encounter. Goblins in Symbaroum are a playable race, so they're not quite as dumb as your run-of-the-mill goblin. Also, as a GM, if you have a hard time making goblin fights more interesting, check out the now classic book by Keith Amon, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. I'll leave a link below for that. Here's one of 4 identical elves of spring. These are actually a bit more detailed than average in this set. Lots of materials to paint in different colors and shades. There are 4 types of elves in the Symbaroum setting, and elves of spring are probably the closest to the Tolkien-esque elves that you're most familiar with. And finally in this box is one of the 4 identical barbarian warriors. Big dude, big shield. Again, some of these minis are just screaming to be primed and painted, which is of course by design. This isn't Steamforged Games' first go at this sort of thing after all. So that's one box sold as its own item. The other box that they sent me was actually for a completely different Ruins of Symbaroum encounter called the Corrupted Colossus. And this box just has one jumbo 28mm scale model. Well, and a battle map, some tokens, and a booklet. The map in this one is just black on one side and has a foresty area for the encounter on the other. If you're wondering why everything is so foresty with all these encounters, it's because the Symbaroum setting is primarily centered around a massive forest. There are other areas too, like towns, cities, and outposts, but a lot of what you might do in the game takes place in the forest. The booklet is the same deal here. 24 pages, staple bound, tons of detail surrounding the encounter itself. There is a connection between this encounter and the previous one we saw, but they're loose enough that you don't have to incorporate them into whatever you run at the table. So check this out. These tokens happen to correspond with the NPC/enemies from the other set. You don't need to buy the other set in order to run this encounter. You can just use these tokens. But if you happened to have the other set, those physical minis complement this encounter. Kind of neat. And here's the Colossus itself. At first I was kind of thinking that a whole box with just one mini in it was kind of skimpy, but as soon as I felt it in my hand, I understood what was going on here. This is a heavy-ish sculpture. They used a lot of material to make this thing, probably as much as what they'd use for 20 smaller minis. In case you're wondering what the hell this thing is supposed to be, it's what happens to a witch in Symbaroum. They eventually get old and turn into these massive forest homunculi, usually bound to another living witch. But if that living witch dies for any reason, the Colossus goes rogue and starts terrorizing the forest or whatever area they find themselves in, and taking them down can be quite a task. So that's it for the unboxing. Let me know your thoughts on this battle in a box concept and if it's something that you'd use at your table. And if you want to see more unboxings like this, let me know. That's all for now. Links are below. I'll see ya.